Appamada's programs and facilities are supported through your generosity. Your support really does make a huge difference. You'll find a link for contributions on the website at appamada.org/contribute. Thank you so much.
Vast is the road of liberation, a formless field of benefaction, where in the universal teaching I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. Vast is the road of liberation, a formless field of benefaction, where in the universal teaching I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. Vast is the road of liberation, a formless field of action, where in the universal teaching I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being.
Well, I guess we'll begin with practice stitches as usual. 5 minutes of that, then another 25, 30 minutes of silent stitching. Before I begin, are there any questions to lead into how to, like what we're sewing today once the practice stitches are done? Is anyone stuck?
I just wanted to be clear on something. I finally put 4 and 5 together correctly, pinned 4 and 5 together correctly. And I just
Okay.
want to be sure that I am stitching on 5 on the first line of 5. Is that correct?
No, so there you've just pinned them together the first time?
Yes,
You're gonna
first time.
You're going to be going through the second line of 4 because it's going to be on top of the 2. So you always go through the second line of the top piece into the first line of the bottom piece when you're first attaching.
They're attached, but the sewing. Oh, so you're talking about sewing now?
Yes.
Sewing.
So yeah, so you're going to be going into the second line of 4 with that showing on top. That's going to be a visible stitch on the finished garment.
Okay. So, okay. I got it. Thank you.
Would you like me to demonstrate it real quickly or are you good to go?
No, I don't think demonstrating would help because Anne helped me during the week and I know I have it pinned correctly, except that the pins need to be on the
wrong
other side. Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yep. Great.
Can you demonstrate it for me though, John?
Sure. So focus. Okay. So just like with all the other pieces, I'm going to suggest that pinch and lift method that I've described, where you put the 2 that you plan to attach with the edge that would otherwise have connected them before you first cut it. Call that the cut line. And you'll grab both pieces and bring them together and then pick them up. So you've got both the cut edges aligned between the 2. And since you're going to be sewing into 4, keep that on top. And then you're going to pull the second line of the top piece aligns with the first line of the bottom piece. So we need to pull the 4 piece this way. So I'm just going to slide it along until you're roughly a centimeter from the edge on that second line, and then you'll begin pinning. And as you pin, you will work to make sure that you go through one crosshair and out through another crosshair.
Right, so it's, hang on, so it's the second line of 3 and the first line of 4.
Are you doing 3 and 4 or?
Like 3 to 4, yeah.
Yeah, so for 3 and 4, yes, you're right. It would be the second line of 3 because that piece is going to be on top of 4. So it would be those 2 edges.
Right, yeah, that's making more sense now.
And then you will slide 3 along until you're about 1 centimeter from the edge of 4. And then you'll go through that second line of 3 into that first line of 4,
Right.
crosshair to crosshair.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, gladly. We've we have reached the 30-minute mark. So you may speak as the spirit moves you, so to speak.
I have a few questions, John.
Yes.
I've got up to the place where I'm having a go at doing the frame. And I've kind of done a mock-up for myself because I find it helpful to do that. So I've kind of done a version of it.
Wow, yeah.
And of course I come across various difficulties.
Sure.
So the questions that I had for you were, have you got any hints on the accuracy of measuring? Because clearly that is, it's very acute with this, the measuring. And there are various points, as I've come to kind of put it with the face that I've, my pretend face, if you like. There's a little bit of leeway that shouldn't be there. So yes, accuracy of measuring was one of the things that I would find helpful.
I actually kind of anticipated that might be on the agenda today, and fortunately printed off a new copy of my framework sheet. So let me actually run and grab a square. A square is really helpful for this phase, so I'm going to run and grab one. I'll be right back. Okay. So for the accuracy of measurement, I assume that you're referring to these measurements here on the worksheet. Is that these are the ones that you're referring to?
Yeah, I think I'm okay with, what's the length of the side, what's the length of the bottom, and the spaces in between. I think I've got that. I think the thing that I've obviously struggled with, I think, is once I've had to mark the little square bits that you're supposed to mark with the hearer. Then it's the accuracy of that I think is probably vital to what happens when you come to making the corners work.
Sure.
So I don't know whether you had any. You said something about a square. What's a square?
Yeah. So. I guess I'll just walk through the entire process if that's okay.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Okay. So what we're doing for those who haven't gotten this far or read this far ahead in the steps and want to watch along or for future reference in the video. So these length of top, length of side, length of bottom, length of side, these are measurements that you will actually take and write in to this document yourself once you have your finished face together. So these are going to be real measurements taken off of your real garment.
Excuse me.
And then,
excuse me, John.
Yes.
What page is that on?
This is a separate page, actually. This is it's available on the website as Rakusu Frame, I believe, or Frame Worksheet. One of those two in the main, just under the instructions page or link. So to measure these, before you measure them, you will actually want to, what both Anne and I recommend doing is redrawing the lines for the seam allowances around the edge of your garment on all the sides. And the best way to do that is to find a corner and edge that you think is pretty square. So I'm going to use this one because it's really one of the only two corners I have to start with. And I'll say that, this bottom line, it's faint though it is, looks pretty well aligned. So I'll say that that is a good line to start with. And I'll use my square, get this a little more centered for y'all. And I will use my square to kind of, this will be the true like starting point, your basis of truth when it comes to what is square and what is not. And so I'm going to try to align it so that it's pretty well an equal amount of seam allowance on this side and on this side. And then I'm going to take my chalk pen and remark that line with this square in mind. So we know then that this corner, in my case, the bottom left corner, this is square, this is true. So then you'll do the same with the nearest corner, which will be on one of the short sides. And you'll know that this line that you've just drawn is good. This line that you've just drawn is straight. So you've gone through, you've redrawn that line, and you know that that's a straight line. So you use your square to redraw a top line. You know that this line is straight for our, we've decided that this line I just drew is straight. And so now that we know that that's straight, we know that this is square. So we draw a new line. And once you've done that, you will get down to in my case, the corners on the 5, which I don't actually have, sewn on yet. So I guess I can just put them here for an example. So there's 5. So I know that this line is straight. I know that this line is straight because I just measured them with my squares up there. And so I'm going to do the same thing and give me a straight final edge, which is off the screen for y'all, isn't it? I will finish off this last edge based on probably, because this was the first edge I measured. I need to zoom out, don't I? This is tricky. Can I get the whole thing in? I'm gonna do it this way. So sorry to flip this around on y'all. I'm sure that is not helpful. Okay, so kind of to start anew, I'm gonna start from this corner, and I'm sorry for starting all over on y'all, but I wanna make it clear I am starting over. So this is the starting corner. For me, it's gonna be the top left this time. I'm going to use my square, get it as aligned as I can with all of my pieces, and I'm going to redraw this whole edge and redraw this whole edge. And I know that those edges are square and true. That's kind of the source of truth for all this. Then I'll go to the nearest other corner, which in this case is the bottom left corner, and I'm going to remark that whole edge based on that line that you just drew and the square. So I want it to be square to the line I've just drawn and decided is true. So you'll have, that should give you, with the square down here and a square up here, these two lines should be totally parallel now, in theory. In practice, stuff moves, but that is the intention. So you will use those two parallel lines and your square to pick a new finished line. And more than likely, this line that I did first, because I chose this corner as my true corner, this line is going to be a truer representation. So I'm going to use my square, align it on this corner, and draw that last line. That should give you a true rectangle on a true rectangle of drawn chalk lines that you've just drawn. This will help disambiguate any variance in where your seam or your lines were originally. They'll also be easy to see now because they're starting to get worn at this point, right? And from there, those are going to be the lines that you will measure for the length of the top, length of side, length of bottom, length of side. And so when you measure these, you're going to measure from crosshair to crosshair. So the seam allowances will not be included. So I will, I would start from, I would align it like this, where the 0 line is at that chalk line that I just drew going that way. And then I would use that measurement for the length of top. And once I've got length of top, I would write it in. Same thing for length of side, length of bottom, length of side. The length of sides kind of how well these match, I would say we want to be within probably 0.4 centimeters difference. And if it's more than 0.4 centimeters when you're doing this on your own, like the length of the top is zero point 0.5 longer than point to bottom, maybe check in with Anne or I just to see if maybe it's not as square. It's very possible that something gets sewn a little wonky, and we can help you decide on how to ease that variation out. It is not a big deal. No, none of these rakusu are going to be perfectly square. So just reach out if it is more than 0.4 different from top to bottom or side to side. So once you have your measurements, you're going to use these measurements to measure and mark on that piece of fabric that we sent y'all. It should just be a long blue unmarked piece, and try to do it close to a corner, because I think I wasn't there when Anne cut them, but I'm pretty sure they're supposed to be both your frames and your straps. So don't just plop your measurement right in the middle of the fabric. Again, a square is really, really helpful. You just simply start from a corner, or you start from you draw one line. That's always a good starting point. And then that line will be your source of truth, and everything should be square based on that line. So my big old square on this little tiny piece of paper, I would draw that top line first, and then measure that edge, and then I would measure that edge, and I would use that to determine this long other edge. And one thing that Peg was always very strongly recommended was also do another measurement right here. So you take your square just part of the way down, and you measure. Again, you mark these 1, 2, 3, 4. You make 4 little marks, and you make 4 little marks here. And it's those marks you're going to try to kind of take an average, kind of you will align. Let me get a dark writing utensil. So this will be that first edge that I've just measured. Let's say the whole thing will be 20 centimeters long, so I have a nice easy number to work with. I hope I don't need to do math, y'all. I really do. If I need to do math, this is going to take way too much of your time. So that is that first line that I've just drawn, and that is my source of truth on this. It's kind of like if you have a selvage edge or a pulled edge, which would be a great place to start if you have that and you're comfortable doing so. So from there, I'm going to, and I don't really, this square is kind of too large for the scale, so I'm going to use this, I guess. So I'm going to say that my whole length, just for this illustration, is 2 centimeters. And I'm going to do my best to take a square, and I'm going to mark those 4 measurements. And I'm not going to do all 4 because of how small this representation is, but I have made it a little mark where that outside line would be for the outermost cut line of the frame on this side. And so, oh, and I would also, goodness, sorry, y'all. Go ahead, and while you have that square lined up, go ahead and mark that end. So that's step 2, is to mark the end and then mark where the corner would be, and then all 4 of the seam allowance 1, seam allowance 2, and then the end. And you go all the way to the other end, and you do the same thing. Mark your 2 centimeters, and this is perfect. It's not actually perfectly aligned, so y'all are going to get to see this in live and in color. So I've got 2 little marks of where I think my corners should be, but this is a really long, narrow stretch, so any deviation can really, add up. So one thing that Peg always strongly advised, you make another square, and you again mark those 4 lines and then you do it again. So usually 3 reference points. You would only so you'd have 1, 2, 3. Normally that would suffice, but this is so long and so narrow. We are advising 4, or I'm advising 4. Okay, so now I have 4 different points that I think are going to be along that outer line. And so, ooh, sorry, vertigo for you. And so then you're going to take your straight edge and you're going to do your best to pick a nice average. So if you can see that one there, so it's, the 2 end ones are pretty much perfectly aligned. So this end is pretty much perfectly right on. This end is pretty much perfectly right on. But you can see that one near 18 is just a little bit higher. So what does that other one tell me? The one near 10, if you can see it right there, it is closer to the ruler than 18. So I'm going to assume 18 is the errant one. 18 was the worst measurement. And I think overall where my ruler currently is placed is pretty good. It's overlapping this last one a little bit. It's pretty much right halfway on the one at 24. So this is a pretty good average. And you would do that for all 4 of the lines that run the entire length. You just do your best to, gosh, this camera. Okay, you just do your best to take a fair average all the way across. And there you go. And you would do that for all the lines that go across. So let me pick, look at the measurements. Let me pick an arbitrary point for one of these corner pieces. These X's are going to become the corners of your rakusu. So let's just do one of them, more or less at random. How is best to do this? I'm going to draw a couple of seam allowance lines. I'm not going to measure these because the scale is funny, and I'm not going to do math on y'all. It's not fair to y'all. So there's one seam allowance. Two seam allowance. Okay, so if you notice, these X's don't actually enter the seam allowance at all. If you have the document in front of you, you can see that there's just total seam allowance space there, that the X only goes to the inner marking of the seam allowance. So I'm going to do the same. I'm just going to start anywhere right in the middle and just use 1 centimeter for, so it's, well, actually, since it's going to be square, I need the measurement. Tried to escape math and it found me all the same. I'm going to call that 1.8 centimeters. So I'm just going to plunk this down right where my ruler currently is and not sweat it too much. Let's assume that these lines that I'm marking now are true to your measurements. So what I'm marking, I just marked right here at 14 and 15.8. That would be you marking the 8.4, where this distance here is whatever is to the left and whatever's to the right. But this that I'm marking here would be the 8.4 on the worksheet. You can see my markings are just on the inside. Golly. Kind of have to be precise, and I hate to make the marking so small. It kind of defeats the illustration purpose. And here is another great opportunity to use your square if you want, once you're checking everything. But what we would generally recommend is you would be progressing along these measurements. Pause. So I'm going to start over just a little bit. I had to kind of think this through. Sorry about this, y'all. Okay, so you have made your 4 long lines. And so once you've made your 4 long lines, you're going to start measuring along them and making these marks. And what we often recommend, and this will be y'all's first time measuring, won't it? What we recommend is you actually record. So let's say for my length of top, Let me actually do this real quick. Okay, so the length of my top is 6.7, which is totally arbitrary, and don't write that down on your worksheet. And this is actually not correct, but so mine is 0.1, 0.9, 6.7. So what I would do, this is not helpful to y'all. Do you have, Lynn, do you have your measurement for length of top handy by chance, or something close to it? Can you give me an estimate?
I have. My length of top was 27.5.
And we'll actually just call out all the lengths, the top side, bottom side.
And the length of the side was 16.5.
And bottom.
Well, the bottom is 27.5 as well.
Let's
And
do
the length
16.
of the other side is 16.5.
Perfect. Great work. So what we recommend when measuring these, because it's such a long piece, is you actually you do so it's 1 plus 4.2 is 5.2, plus 27.5 is 32.7, 32.7, plus 8.4 is, tried to avoid math, and it finds me 41 point. Yeah. So you do this all the way along, and that way you don't have to pick up your ruler and move it, because every time you pick up your ruler, you're introducing the chance to introduce, half a millimeter variation, and it just, if every time you add just a little bit, because the way you're doing it, you could end up with a lot of variation. So we recommend moving the ruler as few times as possible. This usually ends up being, I think, a little bit longer than a meter. So even if you had a true meter stick, you're going to have to move it, but try to minimize that if you can. So I've got my measurements were 0.1, 0.9, and 6.7. So let me do that. And you just do it. If you can see, I'm going to be doing it on the inside seam allowance. That's where I'm going to be marking, and probably mark into the seam allowance so it's not visible on the finished garment. I don't remember on this one if the marking is on the right side or wrong side. Okay, yeah, you're going to be marking on the right side, so do mark into the seam allowance. So ignore these two. I've marked into the finished area. So 0.1, 1, and then 6.7. Whoop. Did I totally mess that up? I sure did. Sorry. Okay, so I measured along. These are where my two are. Oh, that was right. I just jumped ahead. So I measured the other one, and then 1.8 plus 7.7 is 0.5. Yeah. Okay. So that these will end up being the corners of your X. So then you will mark those lines, and these are you're actually marking.
That's useful to know, because I was trying to do it with the Hera and you can't actually see it afterwards.
Yeah, the Hera is it is helpful, but it is, yeah, you need one side with the markings for sure. So you mark those, and then you do the hera on the other side.
Okay.
Yeah, that's then that's the whole deal. So that should get you accurate measurements. And when you start folding, the measurements should align from there. While we're on the topic, and so we have it in one continuous section of video for everyone to refer back to. And by all means, when you get here, if you have questions, just ask them. But if you want to work off the video, let's get it all in one place. So I sent out to each of you that little paper frame. And I want to point out, yes, exactly, Rosemary. So I want to point out what is useful about that those diagrams and what is not useful about them. So this is the little one that I have to show. The main thing I wanted to demonstrate on these was that this whole side piece ends up underneath the top and the bottom edge. That is the most important thing to know, and this is the side that's facing you. Because when you look at the finished garment, you want to see that the top edge is also on top of the side edge. And likewise, the bottom edge is on top of the bottom edge. And these inside pieces on everything except for this top left corner where the pieces come together, these can be relied on. So this is the way that those are actually folded in the fabric garment. But because of the scale and the paper, don't look at this one too closely. It is not exactly how things are attached. So I have made a little scale version on which I got some of my measurements wrong, so it's a little longer than the real finished one is. So you can see, please stay. Okay. You can see that this piece I'm holding here, this is a top edge, and this is a side edge. And you can see that the top edge is on top of the side edge. Everywhere you see a pin on this, except for on the long edges, all the corners where you see pins, that is where the corner of fabric is hidden. And to demonstrate what I mean by that, so that's where this is the pinned side. Let me find my top left corner actually, so I don't confuse you. Okay, so this is the corner where the fabric came together here. Looking inside of it, maybe. And I can also send some higher resolution, well, better lit photos taken with an iPhone. It's not really too visible, is it?
So John, the whole frame is one long piece of fabric.
That's exactly right.
Oh.
And when you're assembling it, it's actually a bit of a joy. And I'm going to prepare another piece that hasn't been sewn together to show the logic as you go through. You will begin by taking the two loose ends together, and then you begin this pattern of folding over corners like dog ears away and towards each other. And you just go around in a loop. Yeah, it's kind of fun. It is fun. It is definitely a process of trust, though. I went to school for engineering because I have a pretty visual, I can see the way things are constructed. And even I could not begin to fathom how what I was doing would translate into a finished garment. So it will just take, it's just a process of trust. Just follow the instructions as best you can and ask questions as you have them. And then all of a sudden you turn it inside out and it's done. It's really almost magical the way that it's just kind of like, I guess this is how you do it. And sure enough, it is how you do it.
It's beautiful origami.
Yes.
Exactly.
So, Lynn, how does this get you to where you need to be? I see you've had some success with your construction. Does the guidance given about measurement, is
Yeah,
that helpful?
that's really helpful, because I am, just recognizing that you've always got to have that true place before you even start doing the other
Absolutely.
measurement, and that's kind of your guide all the way through, and that will make it into a rectangle, really, and as accurate as possible. I mean, um, I don't think I've done too badly, actually. I'm quite amazed that that it works, as you say. But I recognise that that just a little bit of slippage in the measurement means that then when you try to put the face in, you may find that there isn't the accuracy between the seam allowance and the edges when you want to fit it. And that's what
Thank you for finding that and for asking. I think the whole group will benefit from you taking the time to put together that practice piece. I think that was really wonderful.
Thank you. The other thing that I would like to say, which I mean, for other people that are beginning to do it, I found, my table was not long enough, and that thing about having somewhere where you can actually put the whole, because it really is long, isn't it? The frame piece, where you can put the whole frame piece out. So I put out a decorating table for myself, just something that you can put the whole. And that's also that thing that you were saying about trying not to move it, because fabric's not like wood; it shifts. So it's that sort of, how do you keep it down, and how do you do as much as possible in one go? I think.
I think so too. While it's in your head and in that working memory part of your brain.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much for that guidance, Lynn. That was, I
Thank
think
you.
everyone will benefit from that. Well, I guess I'm going to keep sewing then. Have either Anne or myself mentioned the value of beeswax to anyone here? Like in this setting?
Not to
Have Anne
me.
or I?
No,
I don't think so, no.
no.
So I've got this little thing of beeswax. I actually poured this myself because I have used beeswax candles, so I have it around. But you can buy it at sewing shops and such. It is helpful. The silk that we use is just raw silk, and raw silk is more likely to kind of bunch when you're pulling the needle through once it gets twisted than something like polyester would, or mercerized cotton. I think the mercerized, if I remember correctly, just means waxed. So before I begin with a new thread on a new stitch, I go ahead and run it through the wax. If I remember, it doesn't make a huge difference. It's not game. It doesn't break the process. Like it still works without the wax, but it is pretty noticeable. It's a pretty distinct difference with and without wax on how nicely it pulls through. So again, you just put it against the wax, put your thumb down, and run it through 2 or 3 times, and that's all you need. It just coats the heat and friction is enough to coat it, and that now I've got waxed silk. Thought I would mention that.
Well, yeah, I have found it can bunch up quite easily.
It can, especially since this is a back stitch. So for most people, we don't realize we're doing it, but we're inducing a twist in the thread as we go along because the stitch itself is kind of a twisting stitch. And I haven't given it too much thought, but I don't know of any conscious practice you could do to prevent that, frankly. It just seems like it would take a lot of skill and a lot of mindfulness. On really long stitches, I will just stop, take the needle off the thread, and kind of like you would just like let it dangle and run my finger down it to get any sort of twist out of it. Oh yeah, I will absolutely do that because it'll when you're doing the frame pieces, it's such a long piece of thread that it can make a big difference. Oh, we are at time.
Well, thank you for that tip, John.
Yeah, there's a lot of pieces to this.
Well, you learn all sorts, don't you? Like Lynne's self-threading needles.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for all of it, John.
Okay, thank you all. Until next Sunday. See you next Sunday. Thank you.
Take care.